Welcome to ESG in Practice, where we turn environmental, social, and governance topics into practical, actionable steps.
I'm Anne, your guide to data-driven sustainability insights.
And I'm Abby, with 2 decades of hands-on experience in this field.
Together with our guests, we're unraveling the complexities of ESG, where we move the discussion away from glossy reporting,
in order to make sustainability and compliance a real competitive advantage for your business.
Our first guest is Benedicte Teigen Gude. She's member of the Group General Management team at Wilhelmsen and has worked in sustainability for many years.
I'm excited to welcome Benedicte as our guest today. I first heard her late last year at the Diversify conference, one of the largest events for diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Nordics. During her talk, she emphasized the importance of practical ESG implementation over sustainability reporting. And this perspective is why we're thrilled to have her as our first guest on ESG in Practice.
Hello, Benedicte. Thank you for joining us today. We're very thrilled to have you.
Thank both of you for having me. I'm super thrilled to be here.
So, Benedicte, for our listeners, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company? And for our international listeners, can you tell who is Wilhelmsen? I assume everyone in Norway has heard of it one way or another. What exactly is it that you do there?
Wilhelmsen is an old Norwegian company. It's the oldest in the shipping industry. So we were founded in 1861.
Wow.
So a very long history. Today, we are a large international maritime industry group. Basically, we have 3 segments. One part is taking care of anything a vessel needs to be sailing. It could be crew, technical management, it could be refrigerants, chemicals, you name it. We also have a service clearing vessels in and out of port. And for those not familiar with the maritime industry, it could be similar to a concierge at a hotel. Basically, we can fix anything a vessel needs. That's one part of our portfolio. The other part is new energy. We look at new potential energy. We take part in the energy transition. And we also look at companies and technologies that can contribute to decarbonizing our industry in particular. And finally, we also have strategic holdings and investments. So large investments in entities that we think are important for shaping the maritime industry, which is our vision. I've been with the company since 2005, so basically part of the furniture. Today, I am chief of staff, being responsible for corporate communication, HR, legal and compliance, IT and cyber, and not least then ESG, which is the topic for today.
Wow.
Very impressive. Impressive company and impressive career. I wanted to talk to you about sustainability because you have been working in it for a very long time. I would love to hear, how did you get involved in sustainability? When did you get involved? And a little bit more about your sustainability journey yourself and with the company.
If you promise not to start calculating my age, I actually made my first sustainability report in 2002.
2002?
Yeah, were you born?
I was actually just started attending kindergarten at the time.
I worked at the big Norwegian industry company. We decided that we wanted to be forerunners within sustainability reporting. We had the UN Global Compact and the 10 principles, and we basically reported according to them. And back then I worked in a corporate communications team where typically ESG reporting has been historically.
Very good. And I'm curious to see, one is about reporting, but moving into the implementation aspect of it. We want this podcast to focus on implementation. So moving the focus from reporting to implementation, I wanted to ask a question about a very popular topic that's going on right now about double materiality. Can you share a little bit more about your thoughts on double materiality and what your company has done with it?
Absolutely. In the old days, I think most people and companies, not least, looking into sustainability would look at it from a risk perspective. You would see, okay, where do we impact? Where do we have our risks? And then make mitigating actions based on that. But today, the key word is double. So in addition to looking at how you impact the world, you will also look at how the outside world impacts your company. That's where the double materiality comes into play. It's not only about looking into what is material for your company, but also looking into both risks, but also opportunities. And not only from an impact point of view, but also from a financial point of view. And that is new right now.
I have a question for that because I'm new to this. I'm learning more and more every day. But you mentioned something about being material for a company. Can you elaborate on that? What does it mean for something being material for a company?
It can be material from an impact point of view, either that you, for instance, have a material impact on on the external world, for instance, the environment, but it can also be that the outside world has a significant impact on your company. If the ocean would rise, that could have a significant impact on businesses close to the sea, as an example. And it can also be on the financial side, either where we see that we have a huge opportunity to make an impact for the company, or where we see that our business has a financial impact on the outside world.
I think what's interesting about double materiality is that focus moving from the risk to the opportunity. Instead of looking at ESG as something to mitigate and to prevent, but actually looking at it as a business opportunity or a strategic driver for the company. I'm curious about how Wilhelmsen has done the double materiality process. Can you walk us through?
Just before walking through, I would just like to bring an example of how we have looked at the opportunities. Because all vessels calling ports in the EU, they need to have a carbon account. And then we combined our knowledge of all the vessels calling ports in Europe together with a company called Affinity and established a new company called Hekla. And they are then finding new business models based on new regulatory requirements. There's where the opportunity side comes into play. But taking us back to the double materiality, obviously that's a hot topic because the CSRD coming into play in 2024. So we all need to be well prepared for that. We have had an intensive autumn and this project then running over 8 weeks. We have looked at what are material impacts, how our business materially impacts the world, and also how things going on in the world might have a material impact on our business. And then done the same from a financial point of view. Then we've had discussions with a lot of different stakeholders to get their perspectives and their expectations of us. We have also gone back after assessing all of the material aspects. We have had to prioritize. You cannot focus on everything. That's impossible. And then we have run that by our stakeholders to see if they agree. And based on that, we have made strategies and plans for the topics that we think and believe are material.
And to deep dive a little bit, what stakeholders are you talking about? Can you give us some examples of internal stakeholders that you involved and external stakeholders?
We have talked to people that work with customers, and we have talked to the customers. We have talked to management in all the different business entities within the Wilhelmsen Group. We have talked to the board of the different entities, including the listed company at the top. We have talked to customers. We have talked to NGOs. We have looked at topic trending in media and among non-governmental organizations. So there's a whole bunch of different stakeholders that we have involved.
And you said this process took 8 weeks from start to finish?
Yeah. It's been stressful for the organization, but this is the first time we do it. We thought that we would rather do an intensive process and rather develop over time. It will not be perfect the first time.
No, that's a good point. I think a lot of people want to do it exactly perfect and hesitant to start. And one point is just start moving and then you learn along the way. But what is the biggest learning, I would say, from this 8-week process? What's maybe 1 or 2 new things that you learned?
That it's possible to do in 8 weeks. I think that's sort of
that's an important one.
Yeah. And I also think that my recommendation would be not to overdo it, because it can be perceived as being comprehensive, but rather try and limit the amount of work you do. What is really material? Because focus is a word that you cannot spread your focus on very many different things, because then you don't have focus. So finding what is really material and why, where you actually have a big impact on your environment and how the environment impacts your business, and find what is really, really core, because you have to prioritize. Everything, obviously, within ESG is super important, but you really need to narrow it down to something where you can make impactful action.
I have a question. How different and how much more difficult was it to conduct a double materiality compared to a regular materiality assessment?
That's a good question, because I think one of our first meetings, when I saw all these pale faces overwhelmed by the amount, I said, guys, we have done this before. As a group, we have done materiality assessments for more than 10 years. And the new thing is that you will actually also look at how the world outside your company affects your entity, and also that you have to check it out with your customers. And I said, but we do talk to customers all the time. We talk to stakeholders, so we know what's going on. So don't make it more difficult than it has to be. And it's also more fun to look at the opportunity space. But I think most people come from a reporting point of view and they come from a setting where you're just trying to mitigate the impact side, but to also look at the opportunities and where you can make new business models, where you can create value for your customers and for your company. I mean, that's a fun exercise.
Absolutely. We're going to focus a little bit on double materiality here, but now that you've found the key indicators, what are the next steps within the organization?
Right now, we are at the stage where we have agreed on the topics. The next big step for us is in a few weeks where we have to run this by our board. And based on what we find material for our company and group of companies, we will start diving into, so what will be the actions that will happen next year? Because obviously just putting something into a bucket of being high material impact and high financial impact, that needs to be followed up by some concrete action.
And I think in a previous conversation that we had, we talked about the number of KPIs. As you mentioned, there's so many important topics within environmental, social, and governance. And you can have 15, 20 different indicators, but really, how would you manage that in such a large organization like yours? So what are your thoughts on that? What can be managed centrally? What should be managed locally? And how to coordinate that?
In the upcoming CSRD, I think there's 1,000 different things you have to report on. So again, you need to prioritize based on your business model, your industry, your maturity, what is really important for you. What we have done is to actually develop our own ESG index, because it's difficult to be measuring everything. We have 17 KPIs that we are following up on. And based on one figure that we calculate based on the ESG index, I'm able to say something about the maturity in not only the individual entities in the group, but also the 3 big segments and then at the group level, which is a good way of having the discussion at the different board levels, because we have one related, having 3 or 4 KPIs, and then we have 2 related to social, and then we have 1 on governance. In 2024, we will add a new bucket based on the double materiality, because all the entities, big and small, within the group, they have done a double materiality assessment. So that will be added to the scoring board for 2024.
That's great. Also within the scoring board, you probably have indicators that you're following, but there's also probably sub-indicators that local subsidiaries follow or want to manage themselves.
Yeah, we have set 17 on a group level that we think are important across the different business entities, but then they will add their own based on the double materiality. That could be 1, 2, or 3 or 4 different aspects or metrics based on what they need to focus on a subsidiary level.
I think that's also very important too. So you have your group KPIs that are very important for the group-wide company, but also not to ignore each subsidiary might have their own specific or unique material aspect that they need to cover and actually monitor. So I think it's good that you have the balance. Some companies just say, this is what you do at the group level, you have to do it. Some go bottom up, but to have a mix is a good way to manage both the priorities.
And I have a follow-up question to that, because I have a background in data science. So I'm interested, how difficult is it to find the data sources for these KPIs? Is it always easy, or is it a lot of work to identify what is the right source to track the KPI?
I would say a maturity journey. If you take on greenhouse gas emissions, from our wholly owned companies, we don't have a lot of emissions. Most of our people work in offices. We do have a couple of cars, but basically it's electricity. So where do you find electricity data? That is part of the rental bill. So we have had to set up systems where we can actually identify the electricity line on the rental bill. And then you also need to have a converter, because obviously in different countries, we are present in 60 different countries in 2,200 ports.
A lot of data.
A lot of data. And also, how can you then calculate based on the different input sources? Obviously, if you have hydropower or whether you have cold, they have very different values. So that has been a significant process that I think we've been working on for several years to find a good solution. Obviously, for HR-related data, now with a big modern HR system, it's easier for us to draw HR data. But at the same time, what we have experienced is that the different business entities, they've had different definitions of data. So turnover was measured differently in the different business entities. So there is a lot of work to do on making sure that the quality of the data is good and that we are actually measuring apples and apples. because we are now starting to make decisions based on data. And then you really need to know that the data has the highest quality.
And that's a good point. We're seeing that also in the trend in the importance of data, but also aligning the data between the subsidiary and the headquarters, because there are different definitions, there's different priorities. And it's actually an exercise you really need to go in and spend the time to talk with each other and come with a story and an understanding of how you actually measure and report. It's not easy though. And how long has it taken your company to align on these?
We have had this ESG index for almost 2 years. So the first year was introducing, and this year has been trial and testing. And we still see that we have small tweaks that we need to do. As an example, just a few weeks back, we were discussing learning and development, which is one of the metrics that we measure. And it turned out that some entities have mandatory training that is business related and not only compulsory compliance training, which other entities use as the definition. Today, the HR system isn't able to capture all of the training we do because some is on the job, some might be on different platforms than our HR system. So then we need to tweak the definition. So it's still work in progress. It's moving along the right track.
I mean, this all sounds like a lot of work. Benedicte, I know that you're one of the few Norwegian women that have managed to climb Mount Everest. The reason I say that is because I want to follow up that with a question. How difficult or easy was that compared to dealing with these ESG regulations? Is there any similarities between the two?
I summited Mount Everest in May 2019. It took me probably 8 years to prepare for climbing that mountain. So I made a plan. And at the beginning, actually, I didn't even have Mount Everest as part of my bucket list. It happens along the way, but it took me a long time to prepare. I climbed a lot of mountains all over the world. So I think the similarity, if I were to bridge it to ESG regulatory requirements and actually implementing ESG related activities in an organization, I think the bridge will be, maybe one word is stamina. You need to have endurance because it takes time. Having that high ambition, whether literally speaking is Mount Everest, or whether you have an ambition of implementing highly impactful ESG-related activities in a large global organization, it takes time. So you need to have a high ambition, but then you need to break it down into concrete actions where you actually see you moving along.
I love that because I do think that there is a barrier to entry on ESG or sustainability matters. I think that people feel that they have to be really well resourced or they have to have a lot of budget and they have to do it perfect the first time because regulations are involved. And I think that it's a good reminder of like, yes, you have a long-term goal, but you have to start somewhere and you need to start planning. Benedicte, can you give some thoughts about maybe companies that are smaller that might not have any resources? Where should they get started in this ESG process?
Again, coming back to materiality, what is material for your business? Finding out that core priority, it could be 1, 2, 3, 5. I don't think the number actually matters, but finding out what is really core, because you cannot have focus on 15, 20 different things. It's impossible. And that you focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things does not mean that the rest isn't important. They would still be important. But I think when you have focus and when you have something that you measure, you will see progress. So I think that would be my core advice. Start small and develop. Even Wilhelmsen, we've been around since 1861. We are still developing within this field.
Exactly. And I think it's a good point. Start small, but you can have a plan for more KPIs and you can have that in your plan for your 3 to 5 year plan is saying, I'm going to start with these 3 by year 5, but at least you've written it down. You've set the expectation and you're moving towards a plan, whether it's climbing Mount Everest, getting to X amount of KPIs.
Yeah. It's finding the ones that are really material for your business and that can actually have impactful impacts on whatever is material for you. And I also think still with pride. Because there are bigger entities.
Yes.
So look at what others have done. Look at how they define KPIs. Look at industry topics. And I think you will find a lot of helpful resources to start, even though you have a small organization.
That's true. There's a lot of indexes like SASB. And if you Google your competitors and seeing what they do, and that's a good place to start. And that's also part of the materiality is also to look at industry reports, look at what your competitors are doing. So that's a good point.
Clearly, materiality is important.
In your journey, what has been most surprising or unexpected challenge that you've had when implementing ESG?
If I go back a few years with maybe more senior members of staff, the lack of willingness to dive into ESG has surprised me. I don't like that people call ESG reporting as being non-financial because it definitely has a financial aspect to it. It goes to reputation, whether you are able to attract customers, whether you're able to attract the banks, investors, you name it. So it definitely has a financial aspect. So I think that has been maybe what has surprised me the most. And also very often when you dive into new things, people will go in looking at it. This is a challenge and not with a positive sense. As an example, many years back, a facilitation payment has been a big part of the maritime industry, unfortunately, but it's been part of the trade. And someone said that you cannot go through the Suez Canal without paying facilitation payment. And together with a lot of other industry players, we established something called the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. And we were actually able to prove that we could sail through the Suez Canal without paying facilitation payment. Daring to do things differently than we've done in the past is an important part. You need to try. You don't know if you haven't tried.
And I love that, the collaboration aspect of it, so that you're not one company that's saying like, I'm going to not pay facilitation payments and maybe be at a disadvantage, but you come together with a group and you do it together. I think the collaboration part is so important.
Yeah. And it also the economy of scale.
Yeah.
Obviously, the bigger wave, the bigger move you can actually make.
In terms of support that you've had externally or funny advice that you've had from consultants as you've been building the sustainability strategy?
Right after I actually came back from Mount Everest in 2019, it seemed like the financial community actually suddenly understood ESG. Because I saw in all the presentations, they started using these 3 letters, having them on board because they now want to invest in ESG companies. It could be zero emission, or it could be that they need to have good ESG accounts, that you see investors changing their investment portfolio to ESG mature companies. It could be banks not lending out money to, for instance, oil and gas industry, or that for our part, we actually managed to get an ESG loan, a sustainability loan. So a part of our interest rate is actually dependent on our ESG score to specific metrics. So I think having the support from not only more philosophical point of view, but having banks, having investors, having customers asking for this is an important part. Together with finance and regulatory, I think we can make a change.
Yeah, I definitely see the pressure now, external pressure on companies coming, like you said, from regulators, but also from the financial sector, from the supply chain. And you also see it from the employees. Employees want to work for a sustainable company, and it's so hard to recruit a certain amount of employees to join your company. I definitely see more of the pressure that now executive management is asking about it because their investors are asking about it, and you're seeing a trend there.
I've had a couple of interesting experiences as well. Some years back, while doing a materiality assessment and starting to explore how taxonomy would affect the Wilhelmsen group. And we were also looking at how to embark on the scope 1, 2, and 3 emission journey. One consultant actually asked me whether I could sell one of our assets because the asset had a significant amount of CO2 emissions. And the consultant actually said that, your accounts will look a lot better if you just sell the assets.
Oh, wow.
And I then told the consultant, but the world does not get a better place if we get rid of our assets. So I do think that having an owner like Wilhelmsen with a lot of focus on ESG, we want to be in the space where we can actually influence and shape the maritime industry, will be a much better owner for a company where we need to see a significant decarbonization compared to many other owners in the world. So we also need to be sober enough to say that, these are our account when it comes to, for instance, greenhouse gas emissions. And it will take time for us to get to net zero, but we are working constantly every day to reach that target. Whether it will be in 2030 or 2040, I don't know, because there's a lot of things that needs to move in the right direction for that to happen. Technology and investments being one of them. But we are on a path and we are committed to making it happen.
And I think that's why it's so important to also have the inside knowledge from working within a company to actually implement, because I think it's easy for an external internal person to say, just cut out this asset and you'll be fine. But what is the impact on the employees that work for the company? What is the impact on the country that you're working in? It's not so easy just to say, let's cut out a business to make my report look a little bit greener.
I think that's a great point. Knowing the difference between producing a flashy report and contributing to making the world a better place. In terms of tracking, what is your favorite ESG metric? Is there one?
This is the data nerd talking right here.
I have to ask.
I think I'm fortunate because I can actually say the ESG index. That one metric is important because it actually entails a lot of underlying metrics. I think the ESG index for our group is the one to follow. These days, we have a compliance campaign going. So obviously, I am looking into that compliance campaign every day to check that people are doing their compliance training.
That's great.
I wish I could just choose one, but there's too many important topics. So that's the reason why I'm really happy we have the index that weighs the different metrics into one.
But how long did it take you to build this index?
Is it discussed in quarterly management meetings?
Yes. From the listed entity board to all of the boards in the group.
That's a great initiative, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've seen a few companies do it, but not many actually do that. And I think where you have the metrics on sustainability, almost right side the regular business financial meetings too. So you have them discussed at the same time. Sometimes they're separate. Other companies focus on the business. Really integrating ESG into the business also through the bonus structure is really key. And then it keeps it on the top of their mind. And I think that's also a tip about implementation if you can get to that level. It does take time. I'm not saying that it's simple to get that into the bonus structure, but baby steps, I would say. Once you have KPIs, then you can maybe put it in there.
We have the ESG index as part of the bonus scheme at group level because it's been a maturity process for the business units. So from next year, it will be also implemented in the bonus schemes for the business units.
Great.
But I think a key takeaway from so far is start small and keep growing.
And developing.
Yeah, start at the materiality because that will allow you to focus on what points you want to measure. But also start small, understanding that you will grow and develop. I think a lot of companies get overwhelmed and they want to be perfect from the start. I make an analogy. I think a lot of companies want to have the Rolls Royce and there's a lot of tools selling the Rolls Royce. But maybe you just need a Honda right now in the beginning as a young company to get you from A to B. And then you can upgrade as you get more mature. Because I think sometimes wanting to be perfect starts people from starting at all.
And it is a journey internally. You need to have the right people on board. You need to have management support. You need to have systems to be able to collect the data. And you need to have good processes and quality assurance. You need to have integrated in your strategy. You need to turn the strategy into actions. So there's a lot of things you need to change. That's the reason why I say start small and rather have one focus area where you see that you can succeed all the way and build from there.
I think it's important that you start. From my experience, if I get this huge data set and it's super messy and I don't even start cleaning it because it looks so overwhelming, I'm never going to make any progress. But if I start somewhere, it's going to help me come to the next step. And then the closer I get, the more I clean the data, the more insights come out. And then eventually you're able to produce these dashboards, which everyone is obsessed with. And to get there, you first have to start at just maybe cleaning one column and understanding what's going on. So I think that's also very important for companies. Start somewhere rather than just being overwhelmed and not doing anything.
And I do think the data set, we talked a lot about data, and I think that's something within the industry being more data-based. In the past, I worked as roles, both responsible for ESG risk and compliance, and in the past, it would be very qualitative. But the more data that you can pick from the organization, the more you could actually have concrete steps, concrete KPIs, concrete insights that you can share with the management and board so that you can help convince them and understand the importance of this, so they can see the risks and the opportunities that come from the data within your organization. I do think baby steps in understanding what data you can manage, and it can be small. It can be just how many employees have done a training, but to really have a data-centric focus in mind, because I think what we see is that there's actually a lot of data that's already sitting in companies, but it's actually how do you harness it and how do you report on it so that you can actually monitor the implementation of ESG.
I think it's important that reporting is maybe 5% of the work. 95% of the work should be implementing. But again, where to prioritize and what to do, then data is very important. I just want to underline that we don't only have data because we want to do the reporting. We also use it to actually have impact, because before taking again an example on greenhouse gas emissions, until we actually understood what type of emissions we had and where we had the biggest emissions, it was difficult to initiate actions. Or same when we have to report on gender pay gap analysis. It would be easy to assume that there's a difference in pay. But actually, until you do the analysis based on all of the data, you can initiate actions. Or another example, if you have turnover, it's so easy to say that, we have 10% turnover and a significant number of employees, they leave because they get better paid elsewhere. That is very often that one person says that I can go to a different company and that person got better paid. But it's actually until we deep dive into and ask all the people leaving, so why are you actually leaving? And is it a better job? Is it a bigger job, better paid? Or is it a change of career path? Until we actually analyze, I am not willing to initiate any actions.
Yeah.
Because we could make the wrong actions based on lack of data.
Absolutely. I think the data is a starting point for you to know where to go and where to test and look more. And I love what you said about ESG reporting is about 5% of what you're doing, because I think 95% of it is the implementation. And you can learn a lot from the data and deep dive more into data. That's the whole reason why we started this podcast, to really focus about the implementation, because I think there's so much conversation about how great my ESG report is, but that's only one aspect of sustainability. And actually, to make a change within the company, to be able to develop, you need to focus on the implementation. So I think that's a great point.
And if you look at the ESG 100 report issued here in Norway, they measure the company's ability to report according to reporting requirements. And your ability to translate reporting requirements into a report is very different from actually having progress.
Yes.
So that report does not actually measure whether you have progress on your greenhouse gas emissions, just that you report on greenhouse gas emissions. And I think we all can agree on what is most important.
Exactly. And there are other reports that I've seen that do measure the difference in greenhouse gas and rank them, but they're not as popular because companies don't promote them because their scores aren't as good. So I think ESG reporting has been good for the industry, at least, and the rankings have brought it to the attention about sustainability and the impact it can have. But I think the negative part of that, it has maybe taken a lot of the focus towards reporting versus implementation.
And also, if you just keep reporting and eventually you don't show any progress, then the report of reporting won't look so good, will it?
Not in my view, because you expect to see reporting progress on the KPIs that you actually have in your report. And I was just reflecting on one of your questions earlier. When I started in this reporting area, I remember board members said that, but ESG report is so comprehensive and it's so wordy. And I think that has also been a bit of a challenge, because a lot of the reporting requirements, they actually state that you need to report on progress. Not only do you have to report on the, let's say, turnover figure, but you need to break the turnover figure down by worker group, by gender, by nationality, by full-time employees, part-time employees, by geographies, etc. So it tends to swallow out compared to, for instance, business, where you say revenue went up because we had more customers. Very short and precise, but the reporting requirements actually to show the progress requires you to put in more words and explain more compared to, for instance, a lot of financial data.
That's true. In the past, there's been so many different types of reporting requirements. GRI, UN Global Compact, the SASB has all different frameworks that you can follow. TCFD being another one. And I think with the CSRD that's coming in and ESRS, it's starting to converge in terms of the metrics. But there's still so many, as you've discussed, and really trying to prioritize and understand what of these 100 or 200 that's listed in this report are actually the most material for us. That's the key. I agree with you around that.
Over the years, there's been so many different frameworks, and a lot of them have been very niche oriented, and they all want you to report according to their calculations. From a company point of view, I couldn't hire 10 people to be reporting on greenhouse gas emissions, to carbon capture here, and to UN Global Compact there, and to GRI here. So seeing this coming into one, although very comprehensive standard from a company point of view, I think is actually good, because then it's also easier for us and for the consumers and for customers and for investors to actually be comparing the different entities.
Absolutely. So we've been asking you a lot of questions. Do you have any questions for us?
I am really curious, where is this podcast going to take the world?
I'm hoping it's going to shift the conversation from the glossy reports to actually how do we make change? Because I think for me, a small company or each individual has the ability to make a difference. What I've seen in the industry so far is that it's been mainly the larger companies that have had the big budgets that have been able to focus on ESG. They can pay for the compliance officers or the sustainability officers or the expensive consultants. But I think that's changing because of the ESG regulations that are coming in. I'm hoping this podcast will help invigorate these larger, smaller companies that haven't done anything on ESG just to start. And I think that's the part. Start with double materiality, but just start and then it will get better. And then they'll be able to drive more change.
It's important that these companies start looking at the data aspect from early on, because I think they have an advantage since they can start immediately using data for their implementation journey. One of the benefits I see with data being used is that it allows companies to be proactive rather than being reactive. So not waiting for something to happen. And there's so much innovation in the data space. And with the use of predictive analytics, the future might even tell you if there's going to be a potential issue somewhere before you even know it. And I think if we're not going to make use of data in this sense, companies are going to start falling behind because other companies will use it.
This sector hasn't been the most data-centric, I would say, within the governance and the sustainability area. You see IT, you see finance, see HR have all been digitalized, but compliance, sustainability, the data has been fragmented and not used to the best ability. So I see data as a cost-effective way rather than hiring multiple people to try to manage this, but to actually have a more data-centric approach to implementation. I'm hoping that this podcast will help people to start to actually implement. And I really appreciate the advice that you've given too and some thoughts, because the whole point is to hear what some leading companies are doing and how can they take a version of that to start. That's a key summary of where we are today. So should we go to the rapid fire questions?
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
fun.
All right. Can you give us one word to describe the future of ESG?
Bright.
Biggest misconception about ESG?
That it's non-financial.
Biggest challenge in ESG implementation?
I think lack of focus and resources. I think we have all understood. Priority, materiality.
Most underrated aspect of ESG?
That it takes time. It is a journey.
Great. How would you describe ESG in one sentence?
It describes and measures how mature and advanced organizations are within sustainability.
And why is implementation more important than reporting?
Because reporting as such doesn't make any change. Actions make impactful changes.
Thank
Great.
you so much, Benedicte.
Yes.
This is so great.
Great to be here. I wish you all the best, and hopefully I have been able to share some of our reflections and motivated someone to dive into this field of ESG and not least implementing actions that have a positive impact on companies and the outside world.
Benedicte, it's been a delight to have you here. Abby, thank you for co-hosting this with me.
Yes.
And to all our listeners, I hope that everyone learned something new. I know I did. And I'm looking forward to the next episode already.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.